Tonight, we return to the ruins of They Spoke to the Gods with Cuneiform, Series 2, Sumer, the First Civilization. The air is heavy with the perfume of dust and history, the kind that settles in your lungs and reminds you that this ground has witnessed more sunrises than any living memory could hold. The plain stretches out beneath a low amber sky, and in the distance, the silhouettes of ziggurats rise like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Somewhere in the cracked clay underfoot lies a secret, not of gold nor of jewels, but of language itself. You stand where the first people dared to press their thoughts into the earth, where symbols became speech and speech became immortal. The Sumerians believed that words could summon the gods, that to write was to weave a thread between mortal and divine. And tonight, you will follow that thread into the deep chambers of time. So breathe slowly, listen closely. These ruins have been waiting for someone to hear them again. Let the dust settle, the echoes rise, and the forgotten throne speak once more. The wind slithers between the crumbling walls of Uruk, carrying with it the smell of baked clay. Beneath your feet the ground crunches with the debris of shattered tablets, once prayers, once decrees, once the lifeblood of a civilization. A thin shaft of sunlight pierces through a gap in the walls, touching a half-buried tablet, its surface carved with the familiar alien geometry of cuneiform, wedge-shaped impressions, ordered yet alive, like a code only the gods could truly decipher. Historical fact: this was the world's first written language, born more than 5,000 years ago in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. It began humbly, as marks for counting sheep, jars of grain, or traded copper, but it evolved into something far greater, capable of capturing myth, law, and lament. Fringe belief. Some say the shapes of the signs themselves were a gift from the Anunnaki, the great deities, or perhaps visitors from the stars, who wanted mankind to remember truths too great for speech. And the mystery. Historians still argue whether writing here was invented to please the gods or simply to keep track of taxes. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Perhaps it was something stranger, an accident that became the world's most powerful magic. The sun dips lower, and the clay glows a deeper red. You reach down, brushing the dirt from a small fragment. The grooves are shallow but deliberate, pressed by the tip of a reed stylus in a hand that knew exactly where each wedge belonged. That hand, that scribe, is long gone. But in the pattern of these marks their voice survives, not as breath, but as an eternal echo. A gust rattles through, stirring the sand, as if the city itself is whispering for you to follow deeper into its broken streets. Somewhere ahead, beyond the shadows of fallen walls, waits the first story ever told to the gods in the language of clay. He steps into a room where counting becomes breath. On a reed mat, a low tray holds a scatter of small clay tokens, cones for measures of grain, spheres for sheep, flat discs for jars of oil. Each token fits between finger and thumb like a thought about to be spoken. A woman in a linen headcloth shakes a leather pouch. The tokens rattle like dry rain. She spills them, sorts them, pairs them, and with every pairing, a life in the city tightens into order. Rations, wages, offerings, debts. Beside her, a boy kneads a lump of clay until it remembers the river, then shapes a hollow sphere and slips the tokens inside. He seals the mouth with his palm, smooths it, and the woman rolls a cylinder seal across the wet surface. A procession of priests and bulls appears, repeating around the globe as if the world had chosen a story for its skin. He holds the warm envelope up to the doorway. Light finds the raised forms and turns them into a moving frieze. The seal bears the name of a steward. The steward answers to a temple. The temple answers to a goddess whose gaze is the morning star. This is a city that makes memory with hands. Facts set their feet here. By the late 4th millennium BCE, Sumerian accountants tuck clay tokens into hollow envelopes, bully, and roll cylinder seals across them to certify what is inside. A step follows that step like a footprint after its twin. Rather than break every bulla to confirm its contents, they press the tokens against the wet surface before sealing. The impressions become a message. Soon, the tokens are unnecessary. The surface, inscribed, is enough. And then the hollow becomes a tablet, The first pages in an archive without leather or papyrus, only earth remembering itself. He watches a scribe press signs into a soft square, the color of a sudden cloud. They begin as pictures: a jar, a fish, a head of barley, simple, sure. But the reed stylus has its own idea of beauty, and pictures learn to wear wedges. A stroke cants, a curve becomes a cut. The fish is no longer drawn but named in abstract. The script tightens into proto-cuneiform, marks that are not drawings of things so much as agreements about them. In the courtyard, bevel-rimmed bowls stack like moons, ration vessels or perhaps offerings, their multiplication proof that the city counts as faithfully as it prays. He crosses the threshold of a counting house where walls exhale a cool baked clay sweetness. On shelves, tablets cure in rows, sunlight easing them toward permanence. A steward dictates, 3 jars of oil to the brewer, 2 to the temple kitchen, 4 sheep to the festival. The scribe's hand moves in a rhythm meant to outlast breath. Reed, clay, wedge. Reed, clay, wedge. A heartbeat learning how to speak. A fringe belief walks quietly behind the scribe's shoulder. That these signs descend not from market and barn, but from the sky's own grammar. Priests of Nisaba, lady of writing, say the goddess taught the first stylus how to cut daylight into meaning. Others whisper that the signs match constellations, the barley head a star, the jar a path, the fish a river in the firmament. There are older, wilder rumors, too, that the Anuna taught humans a god script, a set of wedges whose angles mirrored the hum of creation, a music pressed into mud. Whether myth or memory, the belief survives because a city that writes cannot help feeling watched by the things it names. He stands before a shelf of cracked bullae, their insides long since emptied by hands as careful as surgeons. Each envelope is an egg that hatched numbers. Some bear knife marks where they were opened in haste, others were split and resealed, honest mistakes staunched with a new roll of a seal. He thinks of the first steward who realized that an impression could stand in for the thing itself, a miracle and a danger. The moment when symbol steps away from body and begins to walk alone. Outside, the alley is a river of tasks. A girl carries reeds in a bundle longer than she is tall. A potter's wheel spins and refuses to be dizzy. He pauses near a doorway where a teacher's voice makes the air into string. Again. Again. Inside, boys practice the same signs until their wrists ache and their tongues mutter them as if they were prayers. He watches one falter, press a wedge wrong, and close his eyes as if the mistake were sacrilege. The teacher smiles, not unkindly, and smooths the error with a wet thumb. Clay forgives, clay remembers. Historical certainty wears dust. Uruk through around 3300–3000 BCE, yields the earliest tablets, administrative lists and numerical notations, crowded with signs whose meaning scholars will spend lifetimes chasing. They are mostly accounts, yes, but they also hide the seeds of sentences. Names appear, titles, blessings at the margins like shy birds. The city hums between offerings and inventories. Cuneiform learns to keep both. Mystery walks with certainty like a shadow at noon. Were tokens truly the parents of writing, or cousins who grew up in the same house? Did the bevel-rimmed bowls ration bread to laborers, as one school insists, or do they belong to temple kitchens or votive rites, 1,000 small libations poured into the thirst of a god? Did the first signs transcribe speech, or only quantity and kind? Historians still argue in rooms full of light, drawing trees of dissent on walls that crumble politely. Out here, a scribe does not wait for the verdict. He writes. He follows the steward to the gate. Outside the walls, fields unroll like woven green. Irrigation channels glitter, stitched by shadows that rise and fall with a polite splash, water obeying the geometry men have persuaded into its bones. In a threshing yard, barley runs in small rivers beneath the flails. Women sing a counting song that fits the beat of work and the measure of grain. The scribe does not write the melody, but the tablet he drives beside him holds the proof that the song happened and was paid for. At the quay, donkeys cough and bray. A boat slides along a canal polished by poles. A merchant opens a basket, copper bright as sunrise, lapis with night still living inside it, shells that remember a far shore. He offers numbers, and the steward answers with wedges. A seal rolls, a banquet, a hunt, a god with a horned crown. The transaction becomes a story in miniature, and stories, once rolled, become law. He lingers where 3 tablets rest on a sill, still wet enough to shine. The leftmost tablet is only lines and numerals, the skeleton of a transaction. The middle tablet bears the same signs, but here and there a mark softens, bends, leans into sound. The third has a name squeezed at the bottom, the scribe's pride stowed where a supervisor may not notice. Somewhere between the first and third, a door opens. Signs stop standing only for things and begin to stand for words. He cannot hear the moment, but he feels the world tilt to make room. A shadow crosses the sill, a bird, and for a silly instant he expects it to leave a mark. He smiles. The city already has enough marks. In a century there will be more, and a century after, more still, until some rooms are more tablet than wall. The first library is a storeroom with good shelves and apprentices who do not mind dust up to their knuckles. He returns to the tray where tokens wait like small, obedient planets. He takes one, a grain cone, and presses it into wet clay beside a sign that used to be a fish and is now a thought about a fish. The impression sits beside the sign like a parent next to a child who no longer needs a hand to cross the street. He puts the token down. The tablet is enough. Evening comes on like cooled bronze. The counting house door leans under its own memory. He steps out. The alley wears the purple of spent heat. Somewhere a jackal begins its thin music. Somewhere a priest's voice climbs a stair and turns into incense. In a doorway, the boy who erred earlier holds his stylus like a reed flute and traces a wedge in air, practicing without clay, writing on the skin of dusk. The city has found a way to think outside the skull. He knows, though he cannot say how, that this is the true beginning. Not walls, not wheels, not bronze. A hand that turns riverbed into memory. A mark that stands when breath has gone. A sign that can be carried to a god's door and left there without a messenger. Sumer ties its heartbeat to clay and discovers that clay knows how to keep time. He walks toward the temple district, where language leaves the marketplace and climbs into the realm of gods. The ziggurat rises like a stepped mountain against the pale Sumerian sky, its baked bricks warm under the sun, each one marked with the name of a king who claims to have built it for eternity. At its base, scribes sit on low stools, their tablets balanced on knees, styluses clicking like the slow work of insects. Here, writing is no longer just for grain and sheep. It has learned the shapes of hymns, prayers, omens, and decrees, the stylus serving not only the steward but the priest and the king. Inside the courtyard, a priestess in white linen chants to Inanna, her voice weaving through the air like a silver thread. A scribe sits beside her, head bent over a smooth clay tablet. Each word she utters is caught in wet earth, invocations, offerings, promises. In this moment, language is not a contract between men, but a bridge to a being no eye can see. The lines of wedges curve and tilt in patterns meant to please divine sight, as if the gods themselves can read. Historical record says that by 2600 BCE, Sumerian scribes had begun using cuneiform for far more than trade. They carved the first myths, epics, and royal proclamations into clay. Temples housed not just treasure, but archives, walls lined with shelves where hymns to the gods slept beside lists of offerings and the earliest known laws. Writing became the spine of civilization, holding together faith, power, and economy. A fringe belief stirs here, whispered among temple novices, that the gods did not merely inspire writing, but required it. Some claim the patterns of cuneiform mirror celestial charts, that each wedge and stroke reflects the placement of stars on the night of creation. Others insist the act of pressing words into clay is a form of sympathetic magic, each sign a binding of heaven to earth. A prayer spoken fades on the wind. A prayer written binds the god until the clay itself crumbles. He steps into the dim interior of the temple archive. The air smells of dust and oil lamps, the scent of memory made tangible. Clay tablets are stacked in rows, their edges worn smooth by centuries of hands. Some bear the steady, formal hand of trained scribes. Others are clumsy, the work of apprentices still learning to tame the reed. Each tablet is a sealed moment, a wedding contract, a prophecy, a king's boast of victory. Together, they are the city's second body, a body made of language. In the center of the room, a stone basin holds water from the Euphrates. A priest dips his hand, sprinkles the shelves, murmuring that it will keep the words alive. He tells of an older time when language was not bound to clay, but to wind, the speech of gods carried in the breath of storms. Men learned to trap this divine wind in earth so it would not escape. Whether myth or metaphor, the thought lingers. Every tablet is a fragment of a storm, stilled and stored. Mystery remains like a shadow under torchlight. Who first decided that the language of men could reach the gods? Did a scribe simply adapt accounting to prayer, or was there a moment, a single whispered syllable, when divine and human speech touched? And if the gods do indeed read, do they answer? Some tablets hold no reply, only the words of petitioners. Others bear the marks of being intentionally defaced, the signs scraped away, an act some call censorship, others call erasure of a failed bargain. He watches as a young acolyte carries a fresh tablet toward the altar. The boy kneels, lays it before the statue of Inanna, and backs away without turning. The tablet will remain there until the next full moon, absorbing incense smoke and the gaze of the goddess. Afterward, it will join the archive, sealed not just by the scribe's hand, but by the time it's spent in divine company. Outside, the temple steps are wide enough for half the city to gather. Merchants pause to bow, children run up and down, lovers exchange glances in the shadow of the ziggurat. The building is both sacred mountain and public square, its stairways leading upward to the holy, its base sunk deep into daily life. Writing flows here like water in channels. Some streams run to the gods, others to the fields, but all draw from the same source. As dusk approaches, the bricks of the ziggurat take on the glow of copper. The priestess's chant fades, but the scribe continues to work, his reed stylus scratching softly. He is writing an omen now, a reading of the stars and the entrails of a sacrificial sheep. The words will decide whether the king goes to war or stays within the city walls. In this way, writing carries not only memory, but choice, a power so great it binds kings and commoners alike. The last light catches the edge of a tablet, making the wedge marks gleam. For a heartbeat, they look like constellations. He thinks of the stories whispered by the novices, of the gods' eyes moving across the clay. And he wonders, not for the first time, if perhaps they are right. He stands in the heat that gathers around a palace gate, where the king's name is not merely spoken, it is pressed. Bricks crowd the sun with their red patience, each one bearing wedges that repeat a vow in orderly lines. I, servant of the god, built this. The city has learned a new way to hold power, not by shouted proclamation, but by clay that does not forget. A herald steps aside, and a steward leads him through a court where soldiers' oil shields and bronzesmiths sharpen the dark geometry of spearheads. In a shaded room beyond, a scribe sits before a block of still wet clay set upon a wooden stand. The stylus in his hand is cut fine as a thorn. He waits, not for inspiration, but for the measured cadence of the king's official voice, the words that will become the body of decree. Behind the scribe stands another man holding a cylinder seal by its perforated heart, a small stone carved with gods, kings, and beasts, in a procession that repeats if the world is long enough. A door opens. The king enters with the slow certainty of a tide. He wears a skirt heavy with wool and metal, a cord around his waist from which hangs a blade that has tasted both sacrifice and battle. His beard is a careful river, his gaze is the calm between storms. He speaks. The scribe moves. Wedges align like ranks. Canals to be cleared before the month of barley cutting. A pause, a look from the king, and then, let no man divert water without the steward's seal. Another line. Cut purses to repay twofold. The scribe shifts grips and the reed sings. Law condenses into angles that even the wind cannot argue with. When the tablet says enough, the man with the seal steps forward. He rolls the stone across the wet face. Out march figures, a horned god giving a ring and rod, a worshipper with hands lifted, a lion straining against a leash of art. The king's will finds its emblem, and the emblem its way into every storehouse and gate. An iron fact sets down its weight amid the scene. Long before later empires chisel laws into black stone, Sumerian rulers already record decrees, boundary markers, and boasts in cuneiform. Bricks stamped with royal names strengthen walls, cones driven into foundations read like prayers hammered into earth. Tablets proclaim grants of land and exemptions to temples. The stele of the vultures, raised by Anatom of Lagash, tells in pictures and cuneiform how he broke the city of Umma and bound its fields by oath. The king's seal is not merely ornament, it is a portable temple of authority, rolled wherever clay accepts it. And yet another current, more secret, runs under the floor like a vein of cold, a belief that a king's seal is more than a signature, it is a living boundary. Palace women whisper that the carved god on the stone recognizes the true hand. To roll a foreign seal is to invite a foreign will into the city's bones. Some even say the rods and rings in those tiny reliefs are not symbols at all, but the divine decrees that structure the cosmos, caught and carried in stone. To roll them is to rehearse creation on a smaller stage. The king smiles when told such things. He does not forbid them. He is led to the hall of captives, where a new victory is being prepared for memory. A slab waits, limestone pale as dawn, and a carver leans over it with a chisel that has learned patience. In panels of marching men and stacked helmets, a story grows. Ranks advance beneath a net of spears, vultures carry heads in beaks and claws, and above, larger than the human scale, the ruler strides, his weapon a statement of weather. The carver steps aside for the scribe, who fills the blank spaces between figures with tidy, unwavering lines. King of Kish, lofty title borrowed and bent, defeated the rebels, rebuilt the boundary trench, vowed barley to Ningirsu, the warrior god. Has it happened exactly so? The scribe does not say. The stone will say. The debate will travel farther than the wall it is set in. Historians still argue whether these victories record neat fact or a palace's bright dream, whether the seizures of land are as lawful as the wedges insist, whether the King of Kish title means empire or merely appetite. Even the reforms of Urukagina, those lines that claim to curb corruption, to protect the widow and the orphan from officials' hands, stand in a doorway where truth and policy nod to each other without shaking hands. The clay is certain, the world rarely is. In the courtyard, ambassadors from a neighboring city kneel, their tunics dusty with miles. The steward brings out a tablet wrapped in linen, its face newly dried, and reads a treaty into the heat. Land for land, canal for canal. An oath by Enlil, by Inanna, by the king's own life. The rivals touch the seal that has been rolled across the bottom, and in that touch they accept more than inkless signatures. They accept that the king's name can live in their storerooms, on their gateposts, in the back rooms where scribes count sheep. The treaty enters the cracked belly of an archive like a quiet god who moves no furniture and changes all the air. He watches the procession of court, a singer with a lyre of golden bull's head, a hunter leading a lion by a leash that is mostly prayer, two boys bearing a chest of lapis that remembers a mountain far beyond this plain. The king pauses before a clay cone, its shaft etched with tiny wedges from tip to base. He takes it, weighs it in his palm, and drives it with a mallet into the new terrace wall, point first. The cone vanishes into the masonry with a sound like a small truth being accepted by a larger one. Night comes. Lamps turn rooms into bowls of amber. The scribe lays a wet tablet on a shelf, then two more, his fingers stained with river and law. A servant lifts a box of cylinder seals, hematite cool as shade, green serpentine faintly greasy, banded agate that looks like time cut open. Each seal has a hole for a cord, each has a story on its skin. He wonders whose hands will roll them a century from now, or whether another king will grind them down to polish a new boast. Power reuses the bones of power. A figure appears at the doorway. It is the queen, the king's sister perhaps, or his consort, the lines of divinity caught in her face by coal and decision. She sets a small tablet on the table and speaks to the scribe with a voice that learned to command at the same table as the king. Right, she says, the goddess has accepted the votive. The dream was good. In this city, even night submissions find their wedges. The king is not the sole axis. The palace has other stars. He crosses the threshold of a storeroom where shelves bear clay nails, bricks stamped with the royal name, and long tablets with lines like combed fields. Here, the king becomes an archaeologist's future, his presence multiplied into anonymity, his singular weight distributed across 10,000 wedges. The room smells of fired earth and oil smoke. He runs a finger along a brick and feels grit, a fragment of reed, the tooth of a scribe's impatience. A kingdom is a machine that turns human time into durable geometry. Outside, the moon lifts its white coin. The walls cast the kind of shadows that make men into myths. On the parapet, a guard leans and considers the hush of fields and canals. In a garden, watered by a squeaking wheel, a tree shivers as if remembering mountains. Somewhere beyond the gate, the road toward Umma lies under starlight, quiet as a cat waiting. He looks up at the palace facade where glazed cones make a skin of green, black, and cream. Along the base, tiny inscriptions thread like ants: the king's name, the god served, the deed accomplished, the promise to keep building until brick learns to be sky. He thinks of the seal rolled on wet clay, of the relief where the king strides larger than men, of the wedge that makes a threat permanent and a mercy official. He thinks of the hands that press, of the hands that obey, of the hands that break tablets when a dynasty fails and the new sun rises with a different face. Power here learns the same lesson as barley and prayer: to live it must be written. He stands until the lamps gutter and the tablets harden and the scribe's reed dries to a pale husk. Then he walks back through the gate. Behind him, the king's name repeats on brick after brick like a low hymn sung by walls. Before him, the dark receives his steps, and the city holds its breath for morning, when the seal will roll again and the wedges will align and law will be born anew from mud. He moves through the early light toward the temple district, where the air tastes of dust, incense, and baked bread. Here, in the shadow of the ziggurat, words do not serve kings alone. They serve the gods, and the gods speak in wedges. The first cries of merchants have not yet risen. Instead, the faint chanting of priests drapes the courtyards like gauze. At the great gate, two colossal lions in fired clay stand guard, their eyes glazed and bright, as if watching for lies. Beyond them, the temple's central court opens into an ordered chaos of worship, women carrying baskets of dates as offerings, men driving bleeding goats toward the sacrificial pens, boys balancing jars of beer on their shoulders. Above it all, the ziggurat climbs in sunlit tiers, its summit brushing the sky whereon the God of heaven is thought to listen. He watches as a line of priests in white linen skirts files toward a side chamber. In their hands are narrow clay tablets wrapped in cloth. Inside, the air is cooler, heavy with the scent of cedar oil and ash. A high priestess kneels before a low table where another scribe waits, reed poised. She speaks slowly, rhythmically, as if each word must cross a threshold. By the will of Nana, the moon god, let the festival be held on the night of full light. Let the gates be adorned with palm fronds and the statues washed in sacred water. The scribe bends, pressing the syllables into clay. The historical truth is undeniable. Temples in Sumer were administrative hearts as well as spiritual thrones. Priests recorded offerings, contracts, rations for workers, even astronomical observations, all in cuneiform. In the city of Ur, tablets from the temple of Nana list precise amounts of wool, silver, and grain, a divine ledger maintained with human care. Yet behind the neat rows of figures lies a stranger current. Among the priesthood, some whisper that the writing itself carries power beyond its meaning. A wedge pressed in the name of a god is a sliver of that god's breath trapped in earth. To break such a tablet carelessly is to risk angering the divine patron, for the words are not merely symbols, they are vessels. One fringe belief holds that certain sequences of signs, if arranged in secret order, can open the ears of the gods more swiftly, like a key fitting a hidden lock. A priest leads him deeper, into a chamber where walls are lined with baked tablets set in niches. Here are hymns to Inanna, goddess of love and war, her beauty likened to the morning star and her wrath to a lion's charge. Here are omen texts, where the flight of birds, the shape of livers, and the behavior of storms are recorded and compared. One tablet notes, "If the moon is haloed thrice, the river will swell, the enemy will approach. The wedge marks glisten faintly under the flicker of an oil lamp, as though they had absorbed centuries of breath. And here, too, is mystery. Some tablets are deliberately erased, smoothed over with fresh clay and reinscribed. Were the old words errors, or did they contain knowledge too dangerous to leave whole? Historians still debate whether such palimpsests were acts of correction, censorship, or ritual concealment. The priests say little. A novice approaches the high priestess with a small cylinder seal carved in lapis, its surface a dance of intertwined serpents and winged figures. She rolls it across a blank patch on a fresh tablet. The image unfurls like a miniature procession, a goddess standing between two rivers, fish leaping at her feet, the twin streams curling into the shape of eyes. The seal, the scribe says, marks the tablet as divinely witnessed. Without it, the words might not reach the heavens at all. Beyond the chamber, in the temple forecourt, a ceremony gathers. Drums sound in a slow, heartbeat rhythm. 2 oxen, their horns gilded, are led to the altar. The chief priest chants in the old tongue, a language older than the wedges themselves, while another scribe kneels at his side, recording the act. 2 oxen for Nana, at the rising of the moon, from the granaries of Ur-Nama, king of Ur. Clay will outlast the blood on the altar stones. In the heat of midday, he follows a winding stair up the ziggurat side. From here, the city sprawls below like a net of sunlit clay. Canals glint. Smoke rises from bakeries. The palace roof shines with bitumen and copper. Inside the summit shrine, the air is thin, touched with the perfume of burning resin. A priest stands before a small table, a single tablet resting there. Its lines are sparse, almost hesitant. The god spoke, it says, and the moon shone on the east wall. No embellishment, no decree, just a moment captured, as if to remind future hands that even the smallest sign might carry the weight of eternity. He steps back into the light, and the wind catches his robe. Below, the temple's scribes carry baskets of damp clay toward the kilns, where yesterday's words will be made fireproof. Each one knows that once baked, a tablet is almost immortal. What it says may change the fate of a king or preserve the rumor of a god's favor for 1,000 years. And somewhere in those kilns, perhaps, lies a tablet meant never to be read, a private prayer, a forbidden prophecy, or a name the gods themselves have chosen to hide. He turns from altar and throne to a doorway low and plain, where the city makes a quieter kind of fire. The lintel bears no lion, no rosette, only a clay nail pressed with a few exact wedges. A-Dub-Ba-Ah, the tablet house. Within these walls, the next generation learns how to make time obey the hand. Dust breathes as he enters. Boys sit cross-legged on reed mats. Some are scarcely taller than their styluses. Others have grown long and restless, shoulders already remembering the weight of future seals. Before them, a master, Umia, rests a reed across his palm the way a priest rests a prayer. He does not raise his voice. He allows silence to do its work, and the silence persuades the clay to listen. A boy kneads a lump until it forgets its river. He presses it flat on a board rubbed with fine sand. The master leans close. "Hold the reed like the wing of a small bird," he says. "Firm, or it will fly. Gentle, or you will kill it." The boy breathes. The first wedge enters the soft surface. It is not beautiful. It is true. The day begins with lists. Not stories, not laws. Bones first, then the body. They recite the names of woods and fishes, metals and tools, city gates and city gods. They chant the kinds of sheep until sheep become a music. Ewe with lamb, barren ewe. Ram for sacrifice, ram for breeding. They copy the signs for these things again and again, their styluses clicking like crickets in a dry field. Clay erases clean, effort refuses. Historical fact stands like a lamp over the mats. From sites such as Nippur, tablets of the old Babylonian period preserve the school's routine, the A-Dub-Ba, where masters, monitors, and students drilled lexical lists, copied model contracts, wrote hymns, and even practiced mathematics in a sexagesimal web of place values. One boy's tablet complains, "I recited my tablet. My father beat me. I recited my tablet to my overseer. He beat me." The curriculum is hard and famous. Out of it comes the hand that will keep a kingdom from forgetting. But beneath the discipline, another current runs, quiet as groundwater. The boys bring offerings of barley and sweet cakes to Nisaba, lady of writing, whose stylus is a reed, and whose lap is the lap where tablets rest. A fringe belief says the stylus must be woken before it can cut true. The Ummiyah breathes a short verse across the reed, strokes its tip against the clay until it finds its angle, then taps it 3 times on the threshold. Not superstition, he insists, but respect. Some say the number of taps matters. 3 for beginnings, 7 for bargains with gods, 9 when a text must not be forgotten. The master will never confirm this. He handles the reed as a priest handles fire, and that is answer enough. A senior boy serves as big brother, the monitor. He walks behind the younger ones and watches the tilt of wedges with an eye that remembers yesterday's mistakes. When a line sags, he sets a steady fingertip beneath it, no word spoken. When a sign breaks, he hands over water to smooth the wound. Only when a hand won't listen does the reed kiss a wrist with the quick sting of correction. The room accepts this without theater. Clay forgives, patience is finite. Later, the students will copy proverbs that turn the day's heat into wisdom. A scribe without a teacher is a blind man. The one who would excel in the tablet house must rise like the sun over his work. He lingers beside a boy who has just stepped from tally to sentence. The tablet he copies is a temple loan, barley from the granary to the brewer, repayment due at the new moon. The boy tastes the words in his mouth as he presses their shapes into earth. Speech and wedge take each other's measure and agree. In the margin, he squeezes his name in signs that lean like saplings toward light. For the first time, the clay answers him back with himself. Through the open door comes heat and the day's marketplace arguing itself awake. In here, doubt argues too, the sort that wears scholars' robes and sits heavy in the centuries to come. Do the Ba tablets caricature their own strictness? Were boys beaten daily, or do the complaining exercises dramatize the lesson as genre? How many in the city ever passed this door? Historians still argue the share of literacy, whether scribes were a narrow brotherhood or whether a wider band of craftsmen and merchants learned enough wedges to steady their own accounts. The clay offers only numbers of tablets and the fingerprints of more hands than one expects. The master sets mathematics on the floor like a game that is also law. He draws a square with the stylus's flat end, then a circle that nearly fits, then writes numbers that look like fields combed by wind. 1, 10, 60, 600. He shows them how a whole life of measures can be built from 60, how a rope of signs can lash down a canal's width or free a land grant from dispute. A flirtatious rumor ventures through the window. Later men will call a tablet Plimpton 322 proof that these hands play with ratios our schools will call trigonometry. The boys do not know the future's names. They know only that numbers sit within numbers, like gods within gods, and the reed opens doors between them. At midday, bread and dates. The boys squat in a patch of shade whose edges travel like nomads. Someone passes a jar of beer. The rim holds the day's dust like a crown. They trade tablets, not the work, but small clay letters slipped from hand to hand, jokes pressed between friends. A bird shaped poorly on purpose, a lion that looks like a dog who wants to be brave. Laughter runs like a cool trickle over stone. The master pretends not to hear. He hears. He remembers his own dog lions and chooses to become stern again only when the sun moves a hand-width west. Afternoon bends toward hymns. The boys trace the opening lines to Nisaba. O Nisaba, mistress of the reed, tablet whose edges are the world, open your lap and let signs be born. The choir of styluses scratches, a sentence stumbles, the master's reed hovers and then decides to fall short of punishment. The last line lands true. The room exhales together as if a small gate has opened where sky meets ceiling. In a back alcove, 2 apprentices copy an omen series. If an eclipse occurs on the 14th day, the king's enemy will die. If a lamb's liver bears a fissure by the gate, the canal will flood. Their wedges sit carefully while the world they describe refuses certainty. Mystery pulls at his sleeve here, not the mystery of gods, but the mystery of knowledge organizing itself and still finding the edges fuzzy. Are these texts science, liturgy, or statecraft disguised as sky? Historians still argue whether divination represents observation bent into ritual or ritual bent toward policy. The boys only know that tomorrow there will be more signs to memorize. Toward evening, the room tilts gold. The Ummiyah brings out a model contract, marriage portion, witnesses, date, and lets the senior boys copy it, while the younger ones smooth today's broken words into reusable loaves of clay. A novice carries in a small basket of seals. Each boy who has survived a year is allowed to roll one on a scrap of wet tablet, not as signature, but as promise. A god walks across each scrap, a seated figure receiving a worshiper, a horned headdress enclosing the sky, a hero lifting a lion under each arm as if reordering its anger into usefulness. The boys grin and then hide their grins like contraband. At last, the master lifts his reed and lays it down, tip pointed toward the doorway, the sign that the day's door is closing. He walks the mats, pausing to tap a shoulder here, to set a tablet on a higher shelf there, a small act that means, this one will last. Fire it. Outside, the sky has become a bowl of smoke and copper. The boys spill into the lane, lighter by the weight of wet clay they are no longer carrying. Two linger to scrape bits from under their nails with a sliver of reed. Even their hands keep a lexicon. When he steps back into the street, he carries the room's hush in his hair. Somewhere a poet has already begun to assemble a king and a friend who will walk beyond the walls. Somewhere a clerk will keep barley from vanishing into rumor. But both will pass through this door first. The tablet house takes children and returns scribes, citizens of a second city made of marks. In that city, the dead have voices, the gods accept letters, and a boy who once feared to press the first wedge can make a law cross a river without getting its feet wet. He looks once more at the worn clay nail above the lintel, even the building signs itself. He smiles at the small audacity and walks on, listening as the alley returns to its older literacy. Hoofbeat, gossip, a jar's hollow answer when knuckled, the cursive of smoke. Behind him the Ummiyah tidies the day, smooths the practice tablets flat, shapes them into tomorrow. He moves deeper into the heart of the city where the river bends as if pausing to listen, and there, on the high bank, the temple rises like a mountain made by hands. The people call it the ziggurat, but to the priests it is the bond between heaven and earth. Each level stacks above the last, narrowing toward the sky, painted in colors that still cling like memories to the sunburnt bricks, deep indigo, white lime, black bitumen sealing the base from the greed of water. At its foot lies the temple court, broad and paved, where priests and supplicants mingle, their shadows stretching long before the morning. Here, words carry weight not only on clay but in the air itself. The priest-scribes hold clay tablets as they stand in the shade of a colonnade, reading from them in voices as measured as the rhythm of the Tigris. The air smells of roasted barley and incense. The sound of the city fades here, replaced by the low hum of prayer and the slow shuffle of bare feet on stone. Historical fact gleams among the incense. In Sumer, temple complexes were not merely houses of worship, they were centers of economic and political power. The priests administered land, received offerings, oversaw trade contracts, and kept detailed accounts on cuneiform tablets. Archaeologists at Ur and Uruk have unearthed archives containing thousands of such records, from barley rations for workers to the allocation of sacrificial animals. The temple was as much a granary of wealth as it was a ladder to the gods. And yet, under this worldly order flows a more mystical current. Fringe belief whispers that the ziggurat summit is not only a shrine but a gateway, an axis where divine messengers descend in dreams. Some claim the priests climb at night to perform rites hidden from the public eye, burning cedar and juniper to draw down visions, pressing wet clay into shapes they say were shown by Enki himself in the language of water and reed. There are even tales of the star chamber at the top, a place where clay tablets are left under the open sky to absorb the wisdom of the constellations before being read at dawn. He watches a procession climb the ziggurat's ramps, carrying offerings, baskets of dates, strings of fish, jars sealed with bitumen, and small clay figurines. Each step echoes against the baked brick, a sound like heartbeats shared between gods and men. At the summit, the Kella glows faintly in the morning light, its walls lined with reeds bound in gold foil, a place where the divine image rests, veiled from the public. The high priest, wearing a robe patterned with the rivers of Mesopotamia, pours a libation into a stone basin. The liquid seeps through channels into the earth below, as if feeding the city's foundations. A priest scribe kneels at a low table near the shrine. His tablet is fresh, the clay still cool, and his stylus moves in small, precise strokes, recording the offerings, the names of the donors, the gods invoked. But here the act of writing is more than account-keeping. It is intercession. Each name pressed into clay becomes a thread in the tapestry between mortal and divine. And when the tablet is dried in the sun, it is said to harden the plea itself, making it as enduring as the brick beneath their feet. A mystery lingers in the margins of the temple records. Among the lists of goods and rituals, there are occasional tablets whose meaning is unclear, fragments of hymns in an archaic form of Sumerian, diagrams of stars linked by lines, even sequences of numbers whose pattern defies our current understanding. Were these records of astronomical observations, codes of prophecy, instructions for rites now lost? Scholars still debate, but the temple walls keep their counsel. From the ziggurat's height, he looks down at the city. The glint of canals, the slow drift of reed boats, the sprawl of courtyards where children chase each other between shadow and sun. Beyond the walls, the flat plain stretches toward the shimmer of the horizon, broken only by distant date groves in the silver of the river's coils. The scene is orderly, almost serene, yet beneath it beats the restless heart of a people who live by the rhythm of gods and floods alike. He descends with the priests, their sandaled feet whispering over the ramp's baked surface. At the base, an elderly woman kneels before a small shrine, her hands holding a humble tablet on which a single line is written, a prayer for rain. She places it in a basket to be carried inside, trusting that the gods will read clay as they read the heart. The act is both simple and vast, a belief that the wedge pressed by human hands can cross the boundary between earth and heaven. The sun is higher now, the heat rising in visible veils. Merchants gather near the temple's outer wall, knowing the flow of worshippers will bring trade. Priests pass between stalls, their robes gathering the dust of the street, carrying tablets wrapped in reed mats to the temple archive. In one corner, a young acolyte balances a heavy stack of unfired tablets, each one an unspoken prayer waiting for the kiln. He smiles awkwardly as the load shifts, nearly spilling the words of half a dozen supplicants into the dirt. As he steps away from the temple, the storyteller glances back at the ziggurat's terraces. The bricks seem to drink the sun. Shadows lie in layers like stored years. The building is both calendar and altar, archive and stairway. Its purpose is as many-layered as its construction, part treasury, part observatory, part oracle, part myth made solid. And still, the greatest question remains. Do the gods truly hear the cuneiform pressed in their name? Or is the act of writing itself the offering, a human attempt to pin the infinite into the shape of a wedge? No voice answers, only the slow creak of the river below and the murmur of the market resuming its day. Night stands on the roof of the world and listens. He climbs the last ramp of the ziggurat by touch, palm against warm brick that gives back the day's heat in hushed breaths. Above, the sky has shed its dust and shows its iron bones, a black bowl pricked with fires. On the summit platform, 3 priests of the Star House kneel beside a low table glossy with oil. A tablet rests there, cool in the darkness. Beside it lies a reed stylus and a cord knotted at regular intervals, a shadow serpent measuring time by touch. They do not speak at first, they wait. Far to the east, a pale blade lifts, the planet that will be called Venus by strangers, and Ishtar by the city that pays these men in barley and fear. One priest touches the cord and slides a knot under his thumb. The second raises a sighting frame, a rectangle of wood with cross threads stretched taut. The third steadies the oil bowl, stars double themselves in its dark, flickering lake. When the planet clears the horizon, the first knot clicks, and breath returns to the rooftop as if a god had given permission. He watches the scribe priest bend over the clay. Wedges arrive like quiet footfalls, first visibility of the star in the east, day X of month Y. Rising at such and such degree of the path, the night is being weighed, and the weights are numbers that obey 60. He knows, because the city has taught him, that Sumer counts like this: ones, tens, 60s, 600s. The system fits sky as snugly as it fits grain. Circles become 360. Hours split like pomegranates into halves and thirds until they sweeten into minutes and seconds. Historical fact stands here without needing to raise its voice. Across Mesopotamia, star watching becomes a discipline. From the Sumerians' lists of constellations to later scribes who will compile Mul-Dapn, the Plough Star Handbook, these tablets fix the rising and setting of constellations, the lengths of days, the behavior of winds, the bowed path of the moon. The Venus tablet of a king long after Sumer will record the goddess's appearances and disappearances with a patience that could shame clocks. Yet the line of teachers and pupils points back into these Sumerian nights, to terraces where oil bowls double the stars and chords count heartbeats between gods. A fringe belief slips among the priests like a warm draft. Some say the sky is not merely sign, but script, that the gods write with stars, and that constellations are tablets only the patient can read. The lion, the bull, the scorpion. These are not trophies, they are syllables. There are whispers, ulterior and old, that the Anunna arranged the heavens when the world was still cooling, placing bright marks where the first kings should look when time needs a verdict. The Star House keeps such talk close to its ribs and calls it metaphor. On certain nights, metaphor feels like confession. The chief observer raises his hand. "Mark the Zikpu star," he says softly, one of those high fixed flames by which they take the sky's measure. A novice shifts the gnomon, a rod planted true. Its shadow, unseen now, will be measured at dawn. A water clock drips its patient units into a jar, and the rhythm lends the rooftop a heartbeat. The scribe presses the date, the month name that tastes of river and gate, the sign for the king whose decisions lean upon these wedges. Empires will pretend they march by courage alone. The truth sleeps in clay. Wars wait upon the moon. He steps to the parapet and looks down. Uruk is a jeweled net. Canals hold the night like mirrors made for gods. Ovens leave small orange doors open against the dark. But his eyes return upward. The moon has put on its worn silver and hung the day's remainder from one edge. "If an eclipse comes," the younger priest murmurs, almost to himself, "we will write it in the series." He means a sequence of omen texts that not sky to palace. If the moon is eaten in the west, the enemy rises from the west. In the tablet house below, boys copy such lines with cramped seriousness. Tonight, no bite troubles the disc. Tonight, the king will sleep. Mystery kneels at their skirts and refuses to stand. How did these hands, in a world of mud and barley, tie time so tightly? Who taught them to marry rope and oil to vision, to balance a water clock's patient bleeding against a planet's slow seduction of the horizon? Historians still argue whether Sumerian astronomy is purely practical, a farmer's calendar tool sharpened by temple need, or whether a deeper geometry crouches within these lists, a proto-science that already hears the music of spheres years before philosophers give the phrase its grammar. They argue, too, about accuracy, whether those Venus records are observational truth or fitted retrospect, whether the neatness of cycles is a scribe's decorum or the sky's. The priest touches the stylus to the clay's edge and draws a line where sky becomes law. He has been schooled in that school where clay-made days are beaten into shape. He can set up problems with bricks and fields, argue a canal's width in hexagesimal, and still his voice lowers when he says the goddess's star has returned. The city believes with both hands, harvest and omen, measure and myth, two truths that do not collide so much as share a bed. A breeze crosses the platform. It tastes of salt and reeds, of river pulled thin by moon's insistence. The chief observer points with two fingers. "The scorpion sets," he says, "mark it." Wedges fall. He shows the novice how to sight along a line from the parapet's notch to the star's shoulder, then to transfer that angle to a string on a board scored with degrees their fathers called notches and their grandfathers called common sense. The novice nods without blinking, the way one nods when one recognizes the edge of a door in the dark. Below, a dog barks and the sound climbs the brick and loses its name. Up here, the water clock does not bark. It answers, drip, 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 and every drip sits like a peg in a song. The scribe lifts the tablet and breathes warm air across it to polish the face. A thin sheen arrives. He smiles the small private smile of a man who has made a surface obey. He thinks of other star houses speaking across distance in the same grammar, of tablets carried river down and river up, of letters describing the sky to palaces far away. He imagines a room where such tablets stack, thousands deep, a library of nights. Scholars will call them archives. To the city, they are weather and will. A second belief, wilder, lurks near the staircase where shadows pool. There are old men who say that on certain nights the ziggurat is not an observatory at all, but a pier, the place where heaven moors to earth. "We saw a ladder," a mason once whispered, drunk on beer and wonder. "Not wood, not rope. It stood in us." He pointed upward and then inward. "The stars walked down and wore our faces." The star house laughed softly when it heard, the way one laughs at a child who has seen thunder and named it a god's footstep. Still, the rooftop keeps a bowl of cedar smoke burning, just in case. He turns to go as the last measurements are made. The scribe will enter the figures in a series that runs like a spine through the year. The priest will seal the tablet, roll a god across its skin, and carry it down the stairs to a shelf that already sags with celestial patience. At dawn, they will bring the gnomon's shadow inside and lay a fresh tablet on the same table and begin again, because the sky repeats and yet never repeats. And the only way to honor that paradox is to write it until hands forget pain. On the last step, he pauses. The planet that rose like a blade has climbed to be a jewel. He cannot help it. He raises his palm and holds it there as if measuring jewel against bone. The priests do not rebuke him. Men have been doing this since the first evening could be named. He descends. Night thickens around the base of the tower, but its top still gleams, a thought left burning under a bowl, a wick that won't surrender. Behind him, the water clock stops. The last drop falls with a sound so small it breaks the heart of the hour. He walks back through lanes that remember heat. Dogs settle on thresholds. A woman lifts a jar and in lifting mirrors the moon. The river turns once like a sleeper. From a dark courtyard, a boy recites numbers in a whisper, trying to thread his lips to his hands. Over all things, the sky continues its slow writing. And in a room where no one prays aloud, a tablet cools. It says, "On this night the star rose, the moon held, the wind spoke from the west." It says, "We watched, we wrote." How the gods answer, in flood, in favor, in silence. The clay does not say, it hardens, it keeps. It waits to be read by dawn. He comes to the court at a dangerous hour, when the wind crawls along the walls as if carrying a rumor. Torches gutter in bronze brackets. The floor smells of crushed reeds and old blood. In the center, a low table waits, and on it lies the glistening liver of a lamb, still warm, its surfaces shining like oiled bronze. Around the table stand men whose trade is to read what cannot speak. They are Baru, diviners, part astronomer, part priest, part surgeon of fate. The chief diviner lifts a stylus tipped not with reed, but with bone. He traces the organ's ridges the way a mapmaker follows a coast, murmuring labels that sound older than copper. Gate, path, presence, palace, weapon. Each lobe has its provinces, each fissure a precedent, each swelling a clause in a law that predates kings. A clay model rests nearby, palm-sized and ribbed with miniature hills. The diviner uses it as a memory board, touching bumps as he touches the lamb, closing the distance between copy and world. The court holds its breath. The king stands behind a curtain hung with a pattern of lion's paws. He does not watch the cuts. He listens for yes or no pronounced by a man coaxing grammar from flesh. Historical fact lays its wedge on the table. Mesopotamian divination by extispicy, especially liver reading, reaches back at least to the old Babylonian period. Inscribed clay models of sheep livers, found from Mari to Babylon, carry labels for the organ's features, while long omen series, ultimately compiled as Barutu and, for celestial signs, Enuma, Anu, Enlil, preserve generations of observations and rulings. Sumer stands at the well's mouth. Early tablets already note portents, eclipses, monstrous births, strange storms, and the results they were thought to foreshadow. Tonight's ritual is not an improvisation. It is a library, performed. The chief diviner pauses. A crescent-shaped mark, no more than a shadow beside the gate of the presence, tilts like a knife. He inhales the way a scribe inhales before choosing a verb. "There is a threat at the western border," he says, voice even, "but the weapon is weak if the offering is strong." A murmur ripples. A captain hides the brief shrug of a man who trusts steel more than signs. He moves to the clay tablet on the side table, smooth and waiting. The wedges arrive slow, deliberate. On the day of month, a lamb was sacrificed, and on the gate appeared a notch to the west. If such a notch appears, the enemy approaches, but will not prevail if the god is appeased with oxen and beer. The king's steward counts oxen with his eyes. The decision begins to take its shape. A fringe belief steps from behind the curtain like a polite ghost, that the signs do not merely foretell, they compel. To carve a ruling into clay is to braid the universe toward it. Some diviners, never in public, argue that the right sequence of written omens arranged and recited can tilt a war the way a hand tilts a bowl. Others whisper that the liver is not a message board but a door, a quick-made bridge between the king's breath and the god's temper. Press the signs just so, and the god must walk across. The temple smiles at such talk and calls it metaphor. Men who have watched clay bend kings do not find it so easy to laugh. The diviner turns to dreams. A runner has come before dawn with a tablet wrapped in wool, the king's sleep delivered as evidence. 3 lines pressed by a trusted scribe. A river rose and did not flood the fields. A lion lay down at the granary. A star walked into the room and stood by the bed. The dream priest, another specialist, leans close, smelling of cedar and ash. He speaks in the grammar of precedent. River rising without flood means abundance without war. Lion at the granary is strength that guards rather than devours. Star in the chamber is favor if it stands, doom if it falls. The star stood. A murmur again. The liver and the night agree. Go forward, but with offerings first. He thinks of the celestial tablets pressed last night on the ziggurat summit, their patient lists of risings and settings. Fate's architecture here is not one building, but a district. Sky, flesh, sleep, bird flight, the shape of smoke, the creak of a temple door in an east wind. A city of oracles overlaps the city of brick. Streets run between them, and scribes walk with clay from one to the other, binding them with wedges. Mystery does not stand aside. It sits at the king's elbow and asks quietly what no one answers loudly. How much of this is observation, and how much is theater? Did forecasters learn from thousands of knights and lambs, proto-science in priests' clothing, or do they stitch verdicts to the politics of the hour? Historians still argue whether omen series are notebooks of genuine data refined by generations or repertoires massaged to support desired outcomes. The clay keeps both possibilities alive because the clay keeps everything alive that can be written neatly. The second lamb arrives. Hands are steady, knife is sure. The room's silence is a tense rope stretched between 2 stakes, the border and the harvest. The new liver shows a clean path of the king, unbroken, bright under the torch. Relief softens the posture of men accustomed to standing like spears. The diviner marks the tablet again, and this time the wedges accelerate. The pattern holds. Permission thickens in the air. He catches sight of a small shelf where odd tablets huddle, the misfits of the archive. One shows a 2-headed lamb sketched by a nervous apprentice, another a note in hurried hand. At midnight, a storm came from a clear sky and walked in a circle over the temple. The oil did not settle. Such anomalies resist ruling. Some are placed aside for later councils, others are buried under thresholds, folded into the house like bones whose names one does not speak. There are also shards with scraped faces, signs erased until the clay is a bruise. Appeal denied, prophecy canceled, censorship. The record bares its teeth and then covers them. A priest of Nanshe, guardian of oaths and waters, brings a bowl of river to wash the table. He scatters flour with his right hand, makes a circle with his left, and whispers the name that is not for tablets. Now the clerks come, efficient as corridor wind, one for the official version, one for the archive, one for the king's personal chest, where sensitive clay sleeps sealed under cedar. The same hour will exist in triplicate, slightly different in each copy, like the same star seen through 3 bowls of oil. A captain asks the question soldiers ask when scholars finish, when? The diviner answers with the moon's calendar. After the first quarter, when the west wind is friendly and the river walks low. His voice carries no triumph. He has opened the door to a path. Men with blades will decide how straight they keep it. They make the offerings. Oxen low, beer foams. Smoke writes its black cuneiform against a white morning. The king steps out, face unreadable, and lays a ring on the altar stone, weight answering weight. The court exhales. Runners leave in pairs to set timetables along the canals. A potter in the barracks yard begins to shape a clay boundary stela whose wedges will forbid trespass by strangers and ghosts alike. He lingers as the diviners clean their instruments. The clay liver model is wiped and wrapped. The knife is oiled. The table is sprinkled with ash. On the side wall, a tablet cools. Today's judgment captured in angles crisp as new teeth. It will be stored among others that smell of grease and smoke, a shelf of hours that once trembled and now hold still. A novice remains behind, staring at the empty table. He presses his palm to the wood as if feeling for a pulse. "Do they truly speak?" he asks the chief, eyes not leaving the grain. The chief considers. He has stood over too many livers to be romantic, and not enough to be cynical. "The gods speak," he says at last, "but the world speaks louder. We learn the gods' accent by listening to the world." He taps the tablet with a knuckle. This helps us remember how we listened. Outside, the sun climbs, and the city turns its great wheel. Children play at omens, reading the cracks in sun-baked mud like oracles. A woman looks up mid-chore to watch a hawk's path and smiles because the hawk flies east. A scribe in a cool room copies the dream of a man who is not a king with the same patience he gives to a hymn. A breeze from the river carries reed and fish and a hint of rain. War may come, or it may pass like a cloud that never finds shade to forgive. The tablet is certain. The man is not. Between them stretches that narrow Sumerian bridge of wedges over water, where fate and choice step carefully, one after the other, both pretending not to look down. He walks into the hall of scribes, where the light itself seems to bend around the weight of history. The air smells of clay, damp from recent shaping, and of reed shavings scattered like pale husks across the floor. Rows of low benches hold men and boys hunched over wet tablets, stylus tips pressing destiny into permanence. The sound is a muted rain of wedges, short, long, deep, shallow, falling into the earth's skin. Here, the voice of the gods is not spoken. It is pressed. The master scribe, shoulders wrapped in a robe faded from indigo to dusk, oversees the work. His eyes are as sharp as a chisel's edge, scanning each line for slant or hesitation. He knows that a crooked wedge in a royal decree can mean a crooked judgment in the city's streets. His hands bear the memory of thousands of tablets, the faint polish of clay dust never fully washed away. Historical fact settles into the scene like a careful seal. The earliest Sumerian writing, born around 3200 BCE, began as pictographs, sketches of grain, fish, oxen, and over centuries evolved into abstract wedges, cuneiform, efficient enough to record anything from trade receipts to hymns. Entire libraries, such as those found at Ur and Nippur, housed thousands of these clay voices, preserving not only the business of kings but the prayers of farmers, the complaints of merchants, and the laments of widows. Today's work is more sacred than commerce. Before the scribes lies a block of fresh clay as broad as a man's chest. Into it will be pressed a royal hymn to Enki, god of wisdom and fresh water, patron of the deep plans and quiet rescues. The hymn is not new. It is older than the city walls, but each king has it rewritten in his own reign, as if re-inking the contract between throne and divinity. The first lines are dictated slowly, the master scribe's voice steady, each word weighed before the stylus falls. Enki, who holds the plans of the gods, who speaks to the waters, who shapes the tongue of man. Yet the work here is more than copying. On a bench in the corner, a scribe works on a tablet meant only for the eyes of the temple's highest priest. The marks are dense, the spacing unusual, and a second layer of faint impressions hides between the lines. Fringe belief stirs in the shadows. Some claim the gods speak most clearly in the spaces between symbols, that there is a parallel script visible only to those trained to read absence. These silent tablets are said to contain counsel for the king in matters the public must never suspect. prophecies too dangerous to proclaim, or secrets about the will of the gods that could unmake the city's trust. The master scribe does not deny the practice, but neither does he name it. Every script has its shadow, he once told an apprentice, and every shadow has its keeper. A boy, no more than 12, struggles at his bench, his stylus slipping in the clay, smudging a wedge. The master walks over, watching the child's hands. "The gods will not hurry," he says softly, "but they will not wait for the careless." He reshapes the clay with a thumb, erasing the error as if smoothing a wrinkle from water, and gestures for the boy to begin again. In this hall, every wedge is a prayer and a promise. The mystery clings to the air like the scent of rain that hasn't yet fallen. Why does the Sumerian script seem to appear fully formed, with no long chain of primitive signs behind it? Scholars debate whether its birth was a local miracle of necessity or the inheritance of an older vanished culture, perhaps from Dilmun, perhaps from a land now swallowed by the Gulf, perhaps from nowhere we can name. The oldest tablets already speak in a voice too complex to be newborn, as if writing arrived not as an invention but as a return. In the late afternoon, the sun leans in through the tall shutters, slicing the hall into alternating bars of gold and shadow. The scribes' faces shift between light and dark as they bend to their work. One, an older man with a limp, copies a letter from a merchant to his partner in far-off Ebla, the wedge marks flowing like water over stone. Beside him, another scribe carves the record of a trial, two farmers arguing over irrigation rights, into a tablet that will be baked hard, sealed, and stored in the city archive until both men are dust. Outside, the call of a conch shell signals the beginning of the evening rites. A pair of priests enter to collect the day's sacred tablets. They carry them in baskets padded with straw, the way a midwife might carry an infant. Before leaving, the master scribe presses his own seal into the soft edge of each, a mark of guardianship, a tiny emblem of a reed boat under a crescent moon. As the hall empties, he stands alone among the rows of benches, the cooling scent of clay heavy around him. He runs his fingers over the surface of an unfinished tablet, feeling the soft ridges of words not yet baked into permanence. He knows that once they are fired, they will outlast him, outlast his sons, perhaps outlast the city itself. For now, they are only whispers in mud. But when the kiln hardens them, they will become the bones of memory, the cuneiform spine on which the story of Sumer rests. And in those bones, the gods' voices, whether born of heaven or of human longing, will remain long after the hands that wrote them have joined the dust. He descends a stair that smells of damp clay and cedar, a staircase that seems to lean inward as if guarding a breath too secret for sun. Oil lamps gutter against the walls, their flames find old fingerprints in the bricks, tiny whorls of unknown hands that once carried the same light. Below, a narrow chamber opens, cool as a mouth. On its packed earth floor, bowls of dates and beer sit beside little tubes of baked clay, sunk like reeds into the ground, straws for the thirsty dead. He kneels and hears the faintest burble as a libation sinks, as if the soil itself were drinking. Here, the city keeps faith with its shadows. The underworld has many names, Kur, Irkala, the great below, but in this room the names do not matter as much as the habit. Feed the ones who went ahead. A priest of Nansha murmurs the names of the departed, pressing each syllable into the air as carefully as a scribe presses a wedge. A tablet rests on a low stand. The signs on it are restrained, almost shy, and yet they hold a geography no door in daylight can offer. 7 gates, stripped garments, a throne of despair. Historical fact steadies the flame. The Sumerians commit their underworld to clay. In the descent of Inanna, the goddess of love and war strips away regalia at 7 gates to stand naked before her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. In Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the netherworld, a hero learns by bitter errand how brittle the boundaries are between here and below. Even the royal cemetery of Ur speaks a grammar of crossing, lyres, cups, and attendants laid down as if to staff a court that never sees dawn. Tablets and tombs together insist there is a country under the heel of our lives, and it has rules. He reaches toward a shelf where votive figurines crouch in a row, little terrors with lion heads and hooked fingers, the Gala, hunters of souls. Their clay mouths are open like traps. A priestess takes one, wraps it in a scrap of dyed linen, and places it beside a new tablet. The tablet tells the story he knows and fears. When Inanna does not return, the world loses its heat. The god Enki crafts creatures of pity from the filth under his fingernails, beings who do not eat, who do not drink, and sends them to mirror Ereshkigal's pain until she loosens her fist. The priestess presses the last line. Substitute must be found. Mercy arrives with a price. A fringe belief breathes at the edge of the lamplight. Some say the right tablet can function like a passport, a text pressed in sequences kept only in temple hearts, rolled with a seal that shows a god beside a gate. Lay that tablet upon a breast or in a tomb, and the dead will not wander blind. The gatekeepers will read and open. Others whispered darker counsel, that a scribe can write a calling so exact it coaxes a shade upward for one night to answer a question no living mouth can shape without breaking. The priest of Nansha hears such rumors and folds them into prayer, neither denying nor teaching, the way the river accepts both milk and ash. He turns a corner and finds a scribe at work in a niche, copying a damaged descent. The missing wedges yawn like teeth knocked from a jaw. The man fills the gaps with tiny marks that confess ignorance and promise fidelity. Between lines, a gloss. When she passes the fifth gate, they take the ring from her hand. The stylus ticks, steady as a heartbeat. He writes in the present tense because the myth is always now. In the pause between strokes, the chamber seems to breathe with him. Mystery crouches beside the shelf of funerary bowls. What, exactly, did the Sumerians think awaited the common dead? The texts are not generous, no field of reeds, no hill of feasting. Instead, dust, lightless streets, bread like clay. And yet, the libation tubes burrow downward, the names are spoken, and family visit graves as if the dead still keep the house from the other side of the wall. Historians still argue whether these rites offer comfort or maintenance, whether the dead are cherished guests or necessary tenants whose rent must be paid. They argue, too, over Ur's royal graves. Were those attendants willing companions in an orchestrated leaving, or victims of a power that wished to extend its court under the earth? The gold, the headdresses, the lyres with bulls' heads shine. The silence below them says nothing. He rises and follows the priestess through a second door into a chamber painted with a wash of blue that time has wounded into gray. On a shelf lies a tablet whose edges glitter faintly with mica. It bears a dream from the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu's vision of the netherworld, where kings serve and priests knead bread, where the queen of the dead wears no smile, and a dust that is not metaphor turns to meal between the teeth. The scribe beside it speaks softly. He tells the dream as if telling the weather. No cry, only report. He lifts his eyes. Perhaps terror here is honest and does not need thunder. Above ground, the sun shoulders its way toward noon, but in this pocket, time moves sideways. A novice brings a tray with salt, flour, and a small cup of beer. The priest sprinkles the salt, not as seasoning, but as reminder. The living have taste, the dead must borrow it. He pours the beer into the lip of a tube. The sound is a small kindness. He touches the tablet to the rim, just for a heartbeat, as if sealing a letter. He thinks of the sun god Utu, who rides across the sky by day and crosses the underworld by night, bringing a legal lamp into judges' halls. Some say that is how verdicts arrive in dreams, the god carrying omens through corridors no living foot can learn. Others say it is merely poetry meant to comfort those who wait. The chamber accepts both positions because both make men generous with their offerings. A boy stands at the threshold, too curious for his own shadow. He has the look of the tablet house about his eyes. Is it true, he asks the priestess, that when Inanna came back she seized Dumuzi and sent him below in her place? The priestess nods once, not unkindly. And true, she adds, that Geshtinana, his sister, takes his part, so each year one returns while the other descends. That is why the fields sob and then rejoice. The boy chews this and goes, as if he has eaten a seed and cannot yet feel it sprout. He lingers before a set of small tablets whose wedges are unlike the temple's neat accounting. These are incantations, quick and sharp, a different music. May the hand that holds the dead release. May the door swing for the petitioner. May the night remember mercy. The signs crowd each other as if the writer feared the space between them. A seal has been rolled at the end. Not a god on a throne, but a pair of hands lifting a bowl. He strokes the edge and feels the grit of old ash burned into the clay. Up the stair, the city moves in its brighter grammar. A baker slaps loaves, a woman draws water and laughs, a sheet of copper flashes like a fish in noon's mouth. Down here, the verbs are slower. He sets his palm against the cold wall and feels the river wander through the bricks. Are the dead close enough to hear? The priest of Nansha starts a chant that sounds like work more than worship, syllables laid in courses like bricks. "Do you see?" she asks without looking at him. Writing makes a floor that does not cave. When we speak what we have written, we walk on it. He looks once more at the descent in the scribe's lap. He remembers the moment when pity men carry the water of life like contraband, when Inanna rises and the gates reclothe her one by one. He remembers, too, the hand that grabs Dumuzi by the hair, the lover whose springtime hymns once made the date palms shiver. The story does not apologize for the trade. It only insists the seasons depend on it. Myths are honest about the price of bread. He climbs toward sunlight, the steps reversing their inward lean as if exhaling. At the door, he turns. The bowls gleam, simple and exact. The tubes wait like reeds sunk into a quiet river. The tablet hands below will keep copying the gates, so no generation forgets where to knock. Above, wind combs the city into tracks of dust and light. Bells on a goat's yoke count a rhythm. A child scratches lines in mud and calls them streets for his toy cart. The great below remains as certain as thirst. Whether its judges hear wedges as clearly as voices, whether the passport tablets open anything but the living heart, these things keep their dusk. Historians will keep their arguments like lamps against it. The clay will keep its maps. He steps into the afternoon, and the heat takes him whole. Somewhere a lyre plays a scale that leans toward lament and then brightens, as if remembering that Dumuzi returns. Somewhere a widow pours beer into a tube and wipes her eyes with the back of her hand, like a scribe smoothing a line. He breathes and tastes, for an instant, dust and date honey together. Beneath the soles of his sandals, the city rides on its second city, the one made of words and offerings. He understands, briefly and without comfort, that every tablet is both a door and a weight. He keeps walking. The sun keeps its appointment with the west. He reaches the river at first light, where commerce wakes before prayer. The quay of Ur hisses with rope and water. Reed boats bump shoulders, and round kuffas, great baskets skinned with bitumen, spin slowly in their own reflections like patient moons. The air smells of fish and tar, barley and hot clay. Men shout prices, women count jars with their lips. A scribe at a low table angles his tablet toward the sun so the fresh wedges gleam like scales. A donkey caravan arrives from the west, hooves thudding the dust into speech. Their panniers carry cedar boards that still remember rain, lumps of copper green as slow water, and jars corked with pitch. The leader lifts a hand, and at his signal the burdens become lines on clay. A steward recites, "So many minas of copper, so many boards, Lebanon's breath, so many bolts of wool, dyed like night." The scribe's stylus taps and taps. When the list agrees with the eyes, a cylinder seal rolls. Twin lions, a seated god, a worshipper with hands raised, smoothing an image across the wet tablet as if the deal itself required a little god to sit upon it. Historical fact stands among the bales. Sumer's river cities sit at the hinge of roots that reach far. Dilmun, Bahrain, as entrepot, Magan, Oman, for copper, Meluha, the Indus world, for carnelian, ivory, and timber. Tablets name these lands. Seals depict boats with high prows running the gulf like stitched thread. Measures and silver record debt and promise in a common tongue. Shekel, mina, talent. The Tamkaram, trader, walks here with temple steward and palace agent, bargaining in wedges. He watches a merchant open a reed basket to show lapis lazuli, blue as cool dusk. The crowd breathes. Lapis travels like rumor, from mountains beyond the known east, wrapped and unwrapped a dozen times by cautious hands. A young woman holds a lump to the light and sees, for a heartbeat, the sky hold still in her palm. The scribe notes its weight. Another man checks the weight's weight, placing a stone stamped with a tiny bird onto the scale pan. Trust is 2 pans in a memory. Contracts gather on the table like small houses of speech. Here is a partnership tablet. So-and-so entrusts so many shekels of silver to so-and-so for journey to Dilmun, profit to be divided per 9th day upon the return, loss by storm to be borne by the god. Here is a loan. Silver advanced against carnelian to be acquired in Meluha. Interest 1 shekel per mina per month, the debtor's seal and that of 2 witnesses, penalties threefold. Here is a commission. Wool to be exchanged for fish ink and dates with reporting at new moon. Seals roll, names repeat. One man adds a tiny drawing of a boat under a crescent, not strictly necessary, but the temple clerk does not protest. In this city, poetry is often an accountant with a tidy hand. A fringe belief travels water to water with the goods. Some merchants carry incantation tablets, thumb-sized and strung on cord, pressed with brief prayers to Nisaba and Enki. Let the river be straight, let the wind be my servant, let the buyer's tongue be sweet to me. Others paste a sliver of clay under the prow, stamped with a fishman, Apkallu, the mythic bringer of crafts, to coax skill from danger. Old sailors say that at night the Apkallu swims just ahead of the boat as a blue shadow only cats can see. A child reaches toward the water as if greeting someone. His mother pulls him back by the wrist and spits lightly for luck. He follows the scribes into a shade awning where thick tablets dry on a shelf. A steward dictates a warehouse list, dates in, dates out, wool in, wool promised, jars set aside for the moon god's festival, jars set aside for the king's soldiers, jars set aside for a bride price in a marriage 2 streets over. Beside them, a clerk copies a route letter to a colleague in Dilmun. Send my share of the fish ink, keep back the rancid oil, beware the Megan copper, last shipment brittle. The letter will ride in a clay envelope, sealed and sealed again, its doubt and advice crossing the gulf under a skin of pitch. He walks the quay to where the larger vessels load. These are not the shy quaffas of the canals, but gulf boats with ribs of palm and skins of bitumen, double-prowed like fish that refuse to admit they will ever turn. Amphorae nest in their bellies like bees in a comb. A pilot stares at the sky, reading when the way a diviner reads liver. He makes a mark with his thumb on the rail where morning's line of light has crept. A private calendar. We go on the day the sand speaks, he tells no one in particular, meaning a specific wind that lifts dunes into whisper. A scribe notes the departure in a hand slightly different from his market script, as if the sea deserves another calligraphy. Mystery steps aboard with the cargo. Who commands whom in this web? Do temples and palaces own every jar and ledger with the merchants as well-paid hands? Or do private Tamkarim, restless and shrewd, drive trade beyond the reach of priests' inventories? Historians still argue at their comfortable desks, weighing tablets that name households and tablets that tether trade to shrines. The facts point both ways. Here, a temple contract. There, a private partnership sealed behind a tavern, witnessed by a woman with flour on her hands and a boy who swears he can write his name. A man from Far East, his tongue thick with a foreign river, places a square seal rather than a cylinder on a lump of clay. The impression shows a horned animal and lines that are not wedges. He grins at the Sumerian clerk, who grins back and presses a little interpretation tablet beside it, noting, Seal of Meluhan. The two drink watered beer from the same jar, and for a moment the gulf shrinks to a clay's breadth. A small drama breaks the arithmetic. A bale of wool proves short by 2 shekels. The buyer protests with both arms. The seller protests with history. Count again, says the scribe, and they do, and the count confirms lack. The seller tries to swap future promise for present deficit. The scribe's stylus hovers like a stilled bee. Finally, the seller sighs and fetches a tight bundle from a donkey's burden, carnelian beads, orange as baked sunrise. The scribe adds a line. Shortfall made good in carnelian at agreed equivalents. He presses deeper than usual on that wedge, a lesson Clay remembers. By midday, the quay trembles with heat. A troop of boys performs a play on a flat boat. A clever trader outwits a demon of the south wind by offering him a mirror and keeping the copper. Laughter carries over the water. A priest throws dates. A scribe throws a wedge of advice. Do not cheat the wind, it knows where you sleep. The boys bow to both. He follows the caravan road out a little way, where dust turns sound into cloth. Donkeys bite the air. Drivers sing the same 4 notes they have always sung. At a milestone, a man sits with a portable table, making receipts for toll. A soldier watches shade move. On a rock, a hand has scratched crude marks that say, badly, "I, Lugal, came this way with 12. Time will not dignify this with a tablet. The rock will keep it anyway." Under a scrub of tamarisk, 2 merchants and a scribe share bread. They argue not about goods, but about the location of Dilmun in the stories, whether it is merely the island where ships take water and oil, or the paradise where sickness does not come, the place Gilgamesh sought and could not reach. A fringe belief spreads with the crumbs, that men who trade there too often forget their years, that some return younger, some never return, not for loss at sea, but for finding a gate they choose not to leave. They laugh, as men laugh when they tell dangerous truths in the form of joke. Then they grow quiet, and one presses his palm to a small travel tablet hung around his neck. It bears a line, "Nisaba, keep my ledger straight." Another's tablet says, "Enki, keep my tongue wet." The third, a practical man, has pressed no prayer at all. He simply carries a lump of silver tied in a cloth and trusts his own eye. When he returns to the quay, the Gulf boat is pushing off. The pilot lifts a hand. A woman on the bank tosses a ring of reeds that floats, a little green circle bobbing after the stern like a small benign eye. The scribe at the table raises his stylus in salute and writes a single wedge deeper than the others that day. The date. It ties this moment to all later moments that will claim it: storms survived, cargoes lost, prophets praised in beer and song. Evening leans on the river with a cool elbow. The market thins, leaving smell where bodies were. A boy brings a last tablet to be sealed, a marriage contract knotted to a trade pact, 2 families binding dowry to shipment, love to logistics. The scribe sets both on the same shelf to dry side by side. In this city, tenderness and inventory cure together. He watches the kufas drift like coins tossed to a god. The key's noise softens into pattern. A jackal cries beyond the date palms. Someone answers with a whistle. A clerk closes the day's box and mutters the names of those who owe him collections tomorrow. A girl collects stray rushes and weaves them into a mat while her mother counts the silver into piles that will become breakfast and boat pitch. Sumer's empire is not of conquest alone. It is an empire of agreements, little bricks of promise stacked into walls of trust tall enough to shade a world. Whether temples rule it, or merchants or gods who enjoy a ledger, this remains under debate. The clay, meanwhile, keeps the roots drawn, the weights honest, the names remembered, and the quarrels adjudicated in absentia of fists. Night takes the river into its own handwriting. The last stylus mark of daylight dries on a shelf. Tomorrow, the same wedges will ride another boat, another road. The city will open its eyes again with prices on its tongue and distant mountains held secretly in its blue stones. The moon hangs low over the ziggurat, its pale curve mirrored in the polished bitumen of the temple court. He ascends the wide, sloped ramp where priests move like shadows of the brick itself, their robes edged with fringe that whispers as they pass. Here, in the high precinct, Cuneiform bends toward the divine. This is not the marketplace ledger nor the palace decree. This is speech intended for gods. A young Eshgal priest kneels before a low table, the lamplight cutting his profile into bronze. His tablet is fresh and damp, the wedges deep and deliberate. The text is a temple hymn, each line invoking Inanna in epithets that grow like climbing vines. Queen of heaven, lady of battles, guardian of the date harvest, she who opens the door of dawn. Every name is a door, every wedge is a key. The clay will be dried, placed in the temple archive, and perhaps read aloud only once a year during the great procession, when Inanna's golden statue is carried through streets washed with perfumed water. Historical fact rests here like incense in the air. The Sumerians treat writing as sacred technology, one given, so their myths say, by Enki, the god of wisdom, and gifted to humankind through a being called Enmerkar in ancient legend. The earliest surviving hymns, like those to Inanna or Enlil, are among the oldest poetry the human hand has ever known, preserved not for commerce but for eternity. Priests recite them in the same tone with which they would weigh silver or measure grain, because the gods require accuracy, not embellishment. He watches as a senior priest brings forth a foundation tablet, a thick, heavy brick inscribed with a dedicatory prayer. This one is for the repair of the temple's outer wall, damaged by last season's flood. The wedges tell the god why the work is done, by whom, and with whose offerings. Myth says these foundation tablets are not merely records but anchors. Without them, the god might drift from the temple, leaving it an empty shell. The brick will be sealed in the wall itself, hidden from all eyes, yet believed to be read nightly by the deity in dreams. A fringe belief whispers among the junior priests that sometimes the gods reply, not in spoken word, but by altering the clay. A wedge might dry crooked, or a tablet might crack in a perfect diagonal, and the pattern is taken as a sign. There are tales of tablets found with extra signs pressed faintly in the margin, which no hand admits to making. Skeptics shrug, believers bow. In the corner of the courtyard, a baru, a diviner, consults a different kind of text. His is a clay model of a sheep's liver, each lobe and fissure labeled in cuneiform. He uses it to interpret the real organ, fresh from sacrifice, mapping omens onto the body as one might map words onto clay. Here is favor, he says, touching a ridge. Here is warning, pressing a hollow. The outcome will be inscribed onto a small tablet, stored in the divination archive, a record of what the god said on this date. The temple archive itself is a labyrinth of shelves and clay. He steps inside, breathing air dry as powdered bone. Rows of tablets sleep in order. Hymns, rituals, omen reports, donation lists, astronomical records. Some are wrapped in clay envelopes stamped with seals. Only the high priest may break them. Others are pierced and strung on cords, hanging like beaded curtains of language. Here lies another mystery, one that scholars in far ages will still debate. Why such care for perfect preservation? Was it faith that every word mattered to the gods, or fear that misremembered prayers might anger them? Perhaps it was simple reverence for the act of writing itself, the sense that every wedge pressed into clay was a thread tying the mortal city to the immortal court above. He pauses at a shelf of lamentations, each tablet beginning with the same low cry. Alas for the city, alas for the people. These are used when disaster strikes, a failed harvest, a breach in the wall, an eclipse too red. The priests will chant them for days, fasting, until the signs turn favorable. Myth claims the gods themselves join in the lament from their high thrones, their voices the sound of wind through hollow reeds. Outside, the temple's upper platform holds the star tablet. An astronomer priest marks the positions of Venus and the moon, scratching temporary notes into a damp slab before transcribing the final chart. Inanna is tied to the planet Venus. Her rising and setting are omens for war and peace, flood and plenty. The sky is a tablet of light, the clay is its echo. A young acolyte brings a basin of fresh water from the river and sets it by the altar. He dips his fingers, sprinkles the ground, and murmurs a prayer in a dialect so old it is half music. Then he turns to a scribe and dictates, "On this day we washed the court, the god statue was anointed, offerings were made of dates and beer." Even the smallest act for the divine finds its way into clay. Night falls fully. Oil lamps line the temple steps, their flames forming a slow river of light toward the city below. The high priest emerges in a robe embroidered with the signs of the gods, crescent, star, plow, waterline. He lifts a tablet and recites to the crowd, voice deep as the ziggurat's shadow. "Enlil, Lord of Wind, keeper of the tablets of destiny, accept our service, bind our name in your memory." The people bow, some out of faith, some out of habit, some because the weight of the moment presses them like a seal on wet clay. Above them, the moon drifts behind a thin cloud, the kind that scribes might call a veil in temple poetry. For a heartbeat, the ziggurat, the sky, and the river all seem inscribed in the same hand. He walks down from the high court with the scent of incense still on his clothes. Somewhere in the night, a tablet dries that will not be read for 1,000 years, and when it is, the reader will wonder at the hand that made it, the god it sought, and the quiet between the wedges. He stands in a room where clay remembers how to be river, and men try to remember how to be priests. The tablet house is smaller now, its doorway half swallowed by wind-blown dust. Beyond its threshold, wax tablets lean like dark wings against a wall, and papyrus letters, written in a hand that learned from Greeks, curl as if listening for waves that will never reach this inland city. The old shelves remain, but the rows upon them are thin. In one corner, a jar of reeds has dried to a color between smoke and bone. Outside, the city wears new alphabets like jewelry it isn't sure it deserves. An Aramaean merchant calls in quick, easy strokes of sound. A Seleucid coin winks with letters that run left to right like a small river set contrary to the Tigris. The world learns to write faster. The wedge, patient, architectural, keeps its pace and begins to look like a noble animal that cannot be hitched to a new cart. In the tablet house, a priest scribe lights a lamp with a hand that remembers the weight of star nights. He is neither young nor old. He has the face of someone who has sat through many dawns, holding a line steady while kings change their prayers. On the table before him lies clay, cool and gray, a square that could still learn 1,000 names. Beside it rests a stylus cut fine enough to argue with time. He wets his finger, rubs the point, and begins. He writes the sky because that is what can still be defended. Month of Adaru, year of the king whose name is written on silver, not clay. He presses the old month sign anyway, a wedge that carries more years than the man will ever see. Then the numbers. The moon's rising, Venus's absence, the wind's tilt. The old arithmetic, 60 under 60, holds. He pauses when a draft lifts the flame and thinks of the star house that once crowned the ziggurat like a crown of patient eyes. The steps are broken now. Boys climb them to throw stones and boast. An iron fact sets its weight in the room. By the first centuries before and after the turning of the age, cuneiform recedes. Aramaic becomes the empire's shorthand. Greek and later Parthian scripts ride on tax rolls, on theater placards, on the letters of men who sell wine and news. The scholars' cities, Uruk, Babylon, still keep clay awake for astronomy and ritual, but the habit thins. The last dated cuneiform tablets belong to this era. Star lists, omen notes, receipts inside temples where oil still burns for gods whose names taste of reed and storm. Some point to an astronomical tablet around the year 75 of the New Reckoning, others to later fragments, but the pattern is the same. The stylus steps down from public life into the hush of side rooms. Fringe belief stirs like a shadow drink at the edge of the lamplight, that the tablets of destiny, the mythic records that bind the gods' decrees, have been withdrawn. Not stolen by a demon to be hero one again, as in tales of earlier centuries, but returned voluntarily to the archive of heaven. When men choose speed over form, whispers an old priest to a younger one who writes with chalk on wax, the gods keep their file in a higher cabinet. Some claim that in the year a certain star refused its predicted rising, a crack ran the length of the temple's main shelf, a hairline that wrote itself without hand. A sign, they say. Others say wood shrinks, clay settles, old houses groan, leave wonder to the windy. He presses on. The stylus cuts and lifts, leaves and returns, a loom working the thread of time. A boy enters, eyes bright with the quick-spoken world. He carries a letter on a shard scratched with Aramaic lines like reeds in a hurry. He bows because custom has not unlearned itself and lays the shard beside the clay. The priest scribe nods, reads enough to know that taxes will be due in oil and that the city will pretend not to notice until harvest, and returns to his sky. "Will anyone read this?" the boy asks. The man smiles, not unkind. "A god will," he says, "and a man we cannot yet imagine." He writes a hymn because even a scholar knows how to bribe his own fear. Nisaba, keep the habit from going cold. Enki, lay your hand on a reed one more time. He rolls a seal no king would recognize, no lion, no hunting scene, only a boat beneath a crescent. He uses it rarely now. The image looks quaint, like a door that opens to a courtyard no one visits. Still, the act steadies his hand. Mystery sits on the bench opposite and refuses to make room. When, exactly, does the script die? Some scholars in later ages will argue that cuneiform never quite dies, that it dozes like a crocodile under silt, alive in dream, kept on life support by a small guild of priests who carry on through the Parthian centuries, copying star omens and incantations no one will pay for. Others will say that by a certain winter, when the river gnawed the bank and the governor stamped his orders with a Greek ring, the last man who could read Sumerian walked into dust and did not return. The rest could only mouth Akkadian in a ritual tone. Historians still argue which tablet is last, which archive closes last, which hand forgets last. The clay resists verdict. Its habit is to preserve argument, not end it. He lifts a different tablet from a shelf where a dozen sleep in linen. Its edges are chipped. A corner bears the chew of a rat that mistook time for food. He had copied this one in his youth under the watch of a master who could still hear the oldest language when it moved under Akkadian like a fish under water. It is a line from a hymn. The word you speak is a seed. The field hears. He reads it aloud into the small room and lets the sound be its last ceremony. Then he sets it down and reaches for a knife. He scrapes another tablet smooth, erasing a loan from a rain no one now remembers. The clay takes the loss with its usual humility and offers itself for something more permanent than debt. Outside, a Greek actor declaims an old tragedy translated into the tongue of the conquerors. The audience claps when the god machine appears to lower a hero from the roof. Children mimic the machine. A rope, a basket, a shouted deus in a street that has not learned to say ex machina yet. In the temple, a priest threads a narrow corridor to pour a libation in the dark. He carries a small papyrus with a prayer written in ink that runs if you sigh too heavily. The clay on the altar step watches without reprimand. Word reaches the tablet house of a scholar in Babylon who still keeps thick shelves of omen texts and who swears by a Venus cycle the younger men no longer memorize. The old scribe smiles at the rumor traveling like a bird that confuses candle flames for dawn. He will never meet that colleague. The road is watched, the season wrong. Still, the thought makes his hand lighter. A chain of eyes persists, even when the links do not know each other. He dampens the clay's face with a cloth, the way a mother wipes a child's brow after fever. He presses the last line of the night's list. The star did not appear. He marks the reason the way tradition demands, cloud. He could have written smoke, dust, the city's new lamps, bright oil, bright letters. But the old word is kind and accurate. He sets the tablet aside, stamps the date, seals its edge, and breathes on it once for luck he does not believe in. On a shelf above his head sits a tablet from a century ago, a king's brag pressed in the old style by a palace that hired a scribe for nostalgia. I rebuilt the wall. I fed the gods their due. The wedges are fine, the lines straight, the grammar a little unsure, as if the text had been copied from a copy of a copy. It was set in a foundation where no one would see it, as tradition demands, then pried out during a repair and made to sit on a scholar's shelf like a retired soldier wearing armor to the market. He does not laugh at it. He allows it to anchor the room with its remembered certainty. He closes the door on the lamp and steps out into a night painted in alphabets. A bell rings in a quarter where men do business in letters, not wedges. A boy runs past carrying a wax tablet on which his tutor has gouged small rivers that will dry and be smoothed and gouged again. In a window, someone copies a Greek line that says, "The muse loves a mouth more than a hand." The old man lifts his palm and tastes incense that lives only in memory. In an age that will come, other men with other lamps will climb other mounds, find these rooms and carry the clay into light. They will press paper upon the wedges and take their ghost. They will argue over signs, over values, over whether a means water or field, over the name of a king who thought himself permanent and was wrong. They will stand under cliffs where three languages crowd each other, stone teaching sound to strangers, and the door will open. But that is a promise outside this night. Here, the stylus dries in its jar. The clay darkens. A cat walks the sill and chooses not to knock a tablet to the floor. Mercy is small and furry. From the river, a wind comes that smells of silt and a little salt, the sea's rumor making its way inland as rumor does. He looks back once at the tablet house and sees it as a lantern sees its own light, a boat in a country of roofs, a stubborn roof in a country of boats. He does not say farewell because endings are for men who require noise. He walks home with the measured pace of someone who has counted too many shadows to fear one more. Behind him, on a warm shelf, a tablet cools. Its wedges keep their angles, its date keeps its place, its maker does not know if it will be the last. The world often declines to inform a man when he is laying down the final stone of a road. The script does not die, it rests. It turns its face to the wall and refuses to spend itself in days that will not keep faith with form. It leaves shadows, numbers that divide hours into 60s, constellations that still wear Sumer's names, foundations that still hide bricks with vows on their ribs. It passes into the roots of other letters the way a river passes into the mouth of the sea. Not vanished, changed. Night folds the city like a tablet into its clay envelope. The seal will break in another age. For now, the lamp goes out. The stars repeat themselves with the arrogance of immortals. And on a table in a small room, a square of earth holds still, waiting for the next breath that will learn how to read. Night settles over the plain where the rivers crawl toward their meeting, and the mounds lie like sleeping beasts whose backs have grown gardens of thorn and grass. The wind has thinned. It carries only the faintest murmur from the water and the occasional cry of a bird that hunts in darkness. Above, the stars look ancient in a way that refuses comfort, unchanging, unblinking, as if they have kept the same patient watch since the first wedge was pressed into wet clay. Here, in the silence, the story contracts into breath. The houses that once rattled with the clicking of styluses are gone. Their bricks have slipped back into earth, their roofs into air. Yet the earth holds memory the way clay holds form after fire. Somewhere beneath the dust sleeps the line that began it all. A mark for barley, a mark for sheep, a mark for the gods. What began as tallies for trade became a language for the sky. A fact remains like a stone that refuses the plow. Cuneiform lasted over 3,000 years, a span longer than any empire, longer than most of the gods it once invoked. The Greeks, the Parthians, the Romans would come and go, but for a time, clay still spoke in the wedges of Sumer. Then, as if by slow eclipse, the marks dimmed, the teachers vanished, and the world forgot how to read its own shadow. Fringe belief whispers through the centuries that the script was not lost but taken. In this telling, the gods gathered the last tablets, the true tablets of destiny, and sank them beneath the deep waters at the world's edge. There they remain, guarded by spirits of reed and river, waiting for a day when humankind will again need the patient geometry of the wedge to speak across the sky. The mystery lingers, insoluble as the moon's pull on the tides. Was the last tablet written in defiance, a stubborn gesture against a world in love with faster words? Or was it written in resignation, the scribe aware that no eyes would follow his hand? We do not know. The clay is mute now, and the men who could coax its voice have long since returned to the soil they once shaped. And yet, nothing wholly dies here. The hours we measure, the degrees in our circles, the constellations that still carry Sumer's names, these are cuneiform's ghosts. They move unseen in our speech, in the way we tell time, in the stories we think are new. Even the act of writing, of fixing thought into a shape that can outlive the breath that made it, is an echo of those first wedge marks pressed beside the Tigris and Euphrates. The camera of the mind pulls back now, rising above the mounds until the rivers appear like threads of silver laid on dark cloth. Far below, the wind moves over the land with the slow patience of an archivist, turning pages no hand will touch again. There is no sound, but the rustle of grass and the distant trickle of water through reed beds. The stars shine down, their light falling on both the living and the buried without preference. In that vast stillness, you might imagine a faint scratching, the stylus on clay, carried on the wind from a time before, forgetting. It is not a sound you can follow, only one you can feel, like the pulse in your wrist reminding you that you too are a record, brief but marked. So let the dust settle. Let the echoes rise. Let the forgotten throne speak once more, not in the tongue of kings or priests, but in the enduring silence between the stars and the earth. For in that silence, the gods still listen.